I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase yada, yada, yada before, but it kind of means boring, 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 yeah, blah, blah, blah. But I've discovered that the word is not as boring as it sounds. In Genesis 4 verse 1, we find the story of Adam and Eve, and the Bible says there that Adam knew Eve and they bore a son, Cain. When I first heard this story, I scratched my head and said, hold on a minute, this is like the greatest love story the then known world has ever come across, because it's the only love story the then known world had ever come across. Adam and Eve were fresh from the Creator's hand. You can imagine that she ran towards him, hair bouncing in the wind, and all the Bible says is Adam knew Eve. It sounds really matter of fact, doesn't it? But when you look up the Hebrew word for to know, which is the language the original text was written in, the Hebrew word there is yada. Adam yadad Eve, if you like. So it's not as boring as it sounds. And when you look up the definition of this word, we find that yada means to know and to recognize and to understand and to respect. So completely different to the image of sex that the world is constantly feeding us. But what I love about the Bible is it doesn't exclude any other definition of sex. It recognizes that the world will feed us something else. And so in Genesis 19:33, we find the story of Lot. And we know that he got dragged out of Sodom and Gomorrah with his wife and his 2 daughters. And as they were running to the hills, his wife's heart was clinging to Sodom, and she turned around and turned into a pillar of salt. You know the story. And so Lot and his daughters are up in a cave, just kind of waiting for the wrath of God to die down. And Lot's daughters suddenly realise that they've got no one to carry on the family name. Their mum's gone, they've got no brothers, and so they come up with a cunning plan. They decide to get their dad drunk, and they take it in turns to sleep with him. This is not yada. And in this context, the Bible uses the word shakab, and it means a simple exchange of bodily emissions. Shakab is not God's plan for our sex lives at all. The kind of stuff that we see in Hollyoaks and in Hollywood and EastEnders is not his plan for us at all. His plan is so big. He doesn't want us to just have an exchange of bodily emissions. He wants us to be emotionally involved with another person. And we find this in the deep limbic system, which is centered right in the center of our brain. And that is the seat of romance. When we experience sense and touch and smell and sensation, it's all downloaded right there in the deep limbic system. I once had this guy on the phone. He was saying that he was talking to his friend. I shouldn't have been listening to him. But he was saying, oh, this girl, she just smells so nice. And I thought that the deep limbic system is registering that smell. Every time he smells her, a chemical reaction takes place in his brain. But an even stronger chemical reaction takes place when 2 people sleep together. And one of the chemicals that's released during that chemical reaction is dopamine. And dopamine is that craving chemical. It's the chemical that makes people crave a cigarette. It's the chemical that makes people become addicted to drugs or addicted to going to the gym. I don't know if you've ever met that guy who just has to work out all the time. And the minute the gym's closed or he's, broken his foot and he can't go to the gym anymore, all of a sudden he becomes the most miserable man on earth. Well, this is dopamine. It attaches us to the source of our pleasure. Whenever the body experiences pleasure, the deep limbic system is washed with dopamine and we become attracted to the source of that pleasure. I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but when 2 people sleep together, the deep limbic system is washed with dopamine and those 2 people become attached to each other. So the body makes a promise to another person even when you don't. Another chemical that's released during sex is oxytocin. I really like this chemical. I think it's really genius of God because it's a bonding chemical. It means that 2 people are kind of glued together, if you like. Dr. Joseph McClaney of the Sexual Health Institute says it's a very real bond. It is like a glue, an adhesive that sticks people together. And he says that it's not easily broken without much pain. Oxytocin, the only other time that the body releases oxytocin at this level of intensity is when a mother is breastfeeding her baby. Because God intended it to be a bond for life. In the very fibres of our being, we are created for just one person. But this is all amazing stuff. But what I really like is that yada is used nearly 900 times in the Old Testament. So we know that it's already used for Adam and Eve being in a sexual relationship with each other. But it's also used 900 times in the Old Testament for somebody being in deep fellowship with God. It's as if God scratched his head and said, how can I let these human beings just know how intensely passionate I am about them? And then he chose the ultimate human intimacy and said this will be an object lesson for how intimate I want to be with my bride and just how close I want to have fellowship with his people. Is it any wonder then that the devil is working double time to eradicate and remove and cheapen and devalue and casualise the image of sex in our lives?